Welcome, Uncle Chris, again. It's wonderful to have you for a second time. You have so many books that we couldn't cover all of them in one session. So it's wonderful to have you back.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah. So today we'll be talking about mainly two books. We'll be talking about Art, Love, and Truth, and Pearls of Wisdom. Both of these are, just as great works as Sophia or Sahaja, right? But they're also very, very different. So I was, as much as I would love to put my input already, because I'm so excited to talk about these, Uncle Chris, I would love for you to talk about just every book has a seed, right? It's like every book has a seed and a beginning. So I would love to know about that. For maybe let's first talk about Art, Love, and Truth, and then we'll go into Pearls of Wisdom. So Art, Love, and Truth. What can you tell us about it?
So I've always, I've been interested in art, like many people, and my grandfather was an art dealer. He had a gallery in London, selling mainly 19th century and early 20th century figurative, representational paintings, oils and watercolors, very traditional, a lot of very nice paintings, and he had some to home. So there was that in the sort of background. And then when I studied English at university, but I went on to do a postgraduate, a master's in cultural studies. And there I was working on a dissertation, which it was too big, but basically it was looking at the history of Western art and how around you can see a definite kind of evolution of style through Western art from sort of post-Roman, early Christian era. And around 1900, 1920, it really hits a point, a sort of end of the line, where people are painting totally black pictures or totally white pictures, or, I mean, not many of them, but, one or two. And Dada comes in with this kind of absurdity, making a sort of mockery of art in order to try to break through to something else, but not actually discovering what that something else was. And this is the time when Shri Mataji was born, of course. So time went by, and then in 1984, Shri Mataji came to Bristol and stayed with us. And she gave me a long sort of private lecture about art. And she was saying, I mean, it was sort of about the history of art. It was a lot about the dire state of the arts at present and how art, the whole culture has become so materialistic. Sincerity is lacking. I mean, she went actually right back saying that in the Baroque period, a kind of insincerity started coming into art. But, it's got much, much worse in the 20th century. She was saying, I took notes at the time, a lot of notes, and later I have to try and make sense of them. But
naturally,
she was concentrating on the falsehood that there is nowadays. And she said at one point, "This is hell. This is hell."
Wow.
So it's, serious. It's serious. And how modern art can be sadistic, artists just expressing their unhappiness. There's nothing sublime in it, nothing serene. She was also saying how the deftness in the hands is being lost. And she talked about the myelin sheath on the fingers and so on, that this nervous capacity within us is being lost. And we don't have it like people used to. So, not in every case, not in every individual, but certainly in general, it's being lost. It's being undervalued and not used. I mean, there's very little in our education system that allows for the use of the hands. Yeah. Um, and what else? There was another point I wanted to make. That's right. She was saying how what we should stress, or what I should stress, because she was talking about me writing a book about this, which
Mhm.
I had been kind of working on anyway, but this really gave it focus and point. And she said how the one thing I should really stress is compassionate power, that art, the culture should be compassionately powerful. This is what we should be trying to do.
Wow.
And we should be trying to sort of connect with heaven. And then she thought about titles, and she tried one or two: From Art to Truth, Art in the Light of Truth. And then she said, yes, art, love, and truth.
Wow.
And I had a sort
Wow.
of, Ruth was just asking me what I thought about that at the time. And I did have a very kind of mixed reaction, because I really felt my Kundalini come up as she said that. And she said, you see, your Kundalini is coming up. But at the same time, mentally, I was thinking, golly, that's really sort of far out. It's putting it all out there: art,
Right.
love, and truth.
It's very straightforward.
You've got to go for it. There's no hiding behind
Yeah.
academic cloak.
Mhm.
Um, so it took, then I wrote various versions. I mean, the first version I wrote, which took me a long time, was very historically based. It's sort of running through that history of Western art.
Mm.
But I felt it didn't really work. I mean, one of the problems was that it's such a vast subject. Where do you begin and where do you end?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but also I felt I had to establish some principles in order to talk about these things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole, the academic way of looking at the world has completely taken over art and also philosophy. And I mean, people do write other kinds of books about art, so popular books and so on. But anything that has a kind of stamp of being official, authoritative, has to be academic, scholarly, and so on. And this is, they don't talk about God, the spirit, the divine, the sublime. It's just, it doesn't feature in their work because
Mhm.
not it doesn't fit with rationality and our sort of modern rational way of looking at things. So I thought, in order to sort of make any points at all, I have to try and establish the principles to work on. And so that's, I wrote another book, much shorter. And then finally, I wrote the present book, where it's
Mm.
not looking through art historically, but it's just trying to establish these principles of what is really art, in my opinion. Obviously, it's my opinion, but I'm trying to give it an objective basis for
Mhm.
this opinion of mine. Um, so I start off with, in the book, I'll just talk a bit about the book.
Oh.
The problem of the book, the problem of art, rather. So, um, the situation in the world at the moment, that nobody kind of knows anything. Art can be anything someone says it is a work of art. From that point of view, who am I to say, well, no, real art, true art is this? So
Yeah.
I make a distinction quite early on between just art, which anyone can say. I mean, people in the visual arts, plastic arts, have come up with things like, I'm thinking of a work of art.
Mm.
Well, it doesn't even exist, a material object, but that is a work of art. And who am I to say, no, that isn't a work of art? That's a work. Stupid, stupid. Um, so, so I make a distinction between art, which can be anything anybody wants to say it is, and true art, something that has the spirit reflected or expressed within it. And then I go on to try to um, expand upon the qualities that make an art a true work of art. To some extent, I'm not saying there's an absolute division between true and untrue in art. You know, some works of art um, are great, but still, you know, you feel there could be a little bit improved here and there and so on. So the book, as I say, it starts with sort of setting out the problems and the problems of even talking about art and how difficult this is at the present time, because
Mhm.
the old ideas of what um, art of beauty and truth and all these things were, which were generally accepted, during especially the 1960s onwards, they were all put under the sort of critical eye of postmodernists, who were saying, no, no, these old ideas about what constitutes beauty and harmony and so on are political, elitist, class-based, ruling class, upper class ideas, and they're not real. They're just one particular take on it. So art, the whole way of looking at art became very political.
Mm.
I'm trying to say, no, no, we've got to go to the spiritual base. So then I start with the first quality, which, as one would expect, is innocence. That something about art has to be innocent if it's to be real. And I try to say, well, what does that mean in terms of work of art? How is it innocent? And so on. So I talk a bit about that. And then I'm going up. I mean, the book, when you read it, it's got a lot of chapters in it. Is it 100? I think it's 100 chapters.
But very simple. It's
Yeah, yeah, it's very simple.
But so I'm trying to go up. It may seem to ramble around, but basically I'm trying to go up the Shushumna Nadi. So the qualities starting off with innocence and then coming to sort of balance, and then you sort of going more up to the sublime and the divine. So. And at the same time, I'm doing various other things. I'm trying to talk about a sort of negative art. So at the same time, and this is the way one does it really, by talking about the positive, the true, I'm also talking about what is untrue and negative in order to cast a light on the positive and on the negative. So
Yeah.
the negative I see as mainly that kind of art which comes from and drags us towards the subconscious on the left side, or comes from and drags us towards the superconscious on the right side. And this, I think this is, for me, it's one of the most interesting parts of the book, to try to describe how what kinds of art, and when I say art, I'm talking about all the arts, so literature, not just painting, visual arts, but film and
you know, that impressed me, that I initially thought this book is just going to be about painting, but you cover all kinds of things: theater, film, music.
Oh yeah.
Just the breadth of the art, cultural art endeavors.
A lot about music. Music, you know, is the most immediate form of art, and there's a lot to learn. And I think it's the one of the arts, or the one medium of art, that has really kept some integrity, so that, you know, even now people are producing beautiful works of music, whereas, you know, in the visual arts and literature, it's all much more iffy. You know, it's sort of there are little flashes here and there of great stuff.
More modern.
It's all mixed up, you know. But there's also a terrible lot of rubbishy music as well.
Yes.
So I'm talking about the subconscious and what kinds of art express the subconscious, or that sort of direction towards the subconscious, and and which also pull our attention to the left side, and what kinds of art pull our attention towards the superconscious. And I think because I feel that the superconscious, this is a concept that only Shri Mataji really has talked about.
Right.
The word used in other senses. I mean, it may have specific meanings. I think the word has been used occasionally here and there, but not in the with the meaning that Shri Mataji is ascribed to, which is this sort of futuristic, beyond the ego part of the conscious.
Supraconscious.
Yeah, super.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because I feel that we're living in this postmodern era in a very super conscious kind of dominated world. And this is expressed very clearly to me in architecture, in modern architecture, this sort of dead
Oh, sure.
high-rise blocks. I mean, Shri Mataji said in this talk to me that the peak moment of the attack upon Western culture came with the Bauhaus, which was this school of art founded in Germany just after World War One.
Hmm.
And it's interesting with both the world wars that you feel, okay, the war is over in 1918. Finally, we can settle back and have peace, and everything will be better again. And the same in 1945. The Second World War is over. The Nazis are defeated, Japanese are defeated, and now we can have some peace. But actually, it was in the sort of vacuum after these two world wars that so much cultural negativity of a more subtle kind was drawn in. And so, yeah, the Bauhaus around 1921, just as Mother's been about to be born, this is, I mean, they tried lots of different things in the Bauhaus, but what came out of it mostly was the architecture founded by this guy Gropius with a sinister name, Walter Gropius, who was a sort of founder of the Bauhaus and an architect himself. But there were other people. Le Corbusier is probably the most famous one, this Swiss-French architect, who wasn't at the Bauhaus, but thinking along very similar lines. And Mies van der Rohe was another one, who also took over the Bauhaus later. And they came up with this, to me, very super-conscious ideal of art as this sort of, it's completely dead. I mean, they were working with concrete, which is not a good medium because it doesn't, Shri Mataji has said, it doesn't communicate vibrations. I mean, it might, I suppose, if the art itself was of a particularly finely imagined quality, but normally it doesn't. So it's a very dead kind of art, and I go into that quite a lot. But all the time I'm trying to, excuse me, work on this idea of the true qualities of art. And I name about 35 at the end that I worked out. But it's obviously a little bit rough and ready, and some of the qualities overlap and so on. But there's quite a lot of them, which is why the book is long. And the other thing that I'm trying to do is to talk about artists and what it's like for artists working in this modern age. And there's one artist I concentrate on rather a lot. I mean, according to my wife, too much, but a musician, because obviously I choose the works of art that I know quite a lot about, that I personally love. I'm not saying they're the only great works of art, great artists, not at all. And we all have our tastes, which is to some extent individual. So, I mean, Mozart is great, I know that, but I'm more drawn to, say, Bach. That's a personal thing. And this,
and jazz.
so
and
the
jazz.
artist, sorry,
and jazz. You mentioned Bill Evans.
Oh yeah, Bill Evans. Yeah.
I talk about him a lot because his music means a lot to me, as it does to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
yes.
He, but he had quite a difficult life, and I'll read a passage actually. So
sure, sure.
That'll be nice.
Yes, that'd be great.
So this is about sincerity. It's in a chapter called beginning. it has to be sincere. So art, true art, spiritual art. I say spiritual art, sort of summing up what I've said so far, is innocent, playful, inspired, spontaneous, and orderly. It must also be sincere. And so I talk about various artists and so on. And then I say, um, all right, I'll just read a little segment of this. Chuck Israels.
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
This was a bassist, a bass player. I mean, Bill Evans was, all right, so he comes up in the 1950s when he's playing, and he mostly works in a trio format, so piano, bass, drums, which was a traditional kind of form.
Yeah.
He introduced a kind of interplay with the other musicians, so that instead of the piano being definitely always in the forefront, there's more quality with the bass player and the drummer.
Mm.
I mean, it's still piano played, basically, but there is much more interplay. He was a very, I mean, if you're not familiar at all with his work, he's had a beautiful touch on the piano. It's amazing how different pianists' touch vary. And his was, I think most people would say, his sound was particularly beautiful. He had a very, deep way of expressing emotion, but not in a slushy, sentimental way, not in a sort of explosive, letting it all hang out way at all, but a very disciplined, formal way. Yet at the same time, it's jazz, so there's improvisation there. Anyway, I say this about him, but he had one problem, and this was his addictions.
Yeah.
He was I think, lived quite a pure life and was a pure kind of person. Maybe up until time he had to join the army, you know, it's what you had to do in those days for a period. And I think his sensitivities came up against this hard world of the military. And also the jazz world itself was, you know, it's not ideal for someone who's an introvert and, you know, very sensitive person. Anyway, so Chuck Israels, who was one of his bass players, recalls that at one point, long after I had left his trio, I sat down upstairs at the village gate, that's a club, with him and told him how much I admired him. I thought he could have been a big conductor, composer of operas, symphonies. He could have written about music. He could have written books. There's just so many things he could have done. He said that he was flattered and moved that I felt he was so gifted, but that really it was all he could do to hold his life together. Earlier, during his 30s, Evans was often reduced to borrowing money from loan sharks who would threaten to break his hands if he didn't pay up. Michael Deek recalls seeing his first appearance at a club in Los Angeles in the early 1960s. I remember how shocked I was when I saw Bill, whom I had idolized since Kind of Blue days. So Kind of Blue is an album, Miles Davis's band with Bill Evans on piano. And I believe it's the best-selling jazz album of all time. It's considered by many a masterpiece, and it really is. I mean, it's extraordinary. It is a great work of art that seems very spontaneous, but just is right. It has this rightness. It's the spot. So I'd idolized since Kind of Blue days. He was so pale that he had to have some light makeup for color. He had a rope for a belt. Socks didn't match. Despite all this, when Bill sat down to the piano, the air became electric. The musical ambience sublime. All the great pianists in the LA area were in attendance. You could literally hear a pin drop. As Robert Fulford remarks about Evans, those who listen to his records find the story of his life hard to accept. When you hear him gracefully turning some American anthem into his own intricate sonata, stepping inside the tune, occupying it, making it his home. When that happens, it seems clear that you are listening to someone who lived a life full of serenity and intelligence. In fact, he was frequently sick and desperate. And it's the same, I mean, it comes as a shock to learn that Derek Mahon, this Irish poet who died 2 or 3 years ago, I think, who was a great poet, in my opinion, and many people's opinion, should have been given the Nobel Prize, for sure. It comes as a shock that he whose poised and finely crafted poetry seems at once so formal and so legible, uses a lot of meter and rhyme and so on in a traditional way, so thoughtful and so musical, underwent hospitalization for alcoholism on more than one occasion. And one of his greatest poems, Dawn at St. Patrick's, is based on that. He's recovering from alcoholism in a sort of special kind of clinic. It's a beautiful poem. It's lyrical, it's funny, and it's deep. Yeah, it's a great poem. It's often anthologized because people recognize his greatness about it. However, all this is leading up to is the fact that in Evans and Mahan's case, they don't indulge in their problems artistically, not at all. They don't wish to impose their sense of desperation and sickness on others. As Evans himself said, naturally, frustration has a place in music at times, especially in dramatic music. I mean, if you're writing programmed opera music or music for film, okay, frustration has a place but, to be expressed. But I think that other feelings are more important, and that there is an obligation, or at least a responsibility, to present mostly the feelings which are my best feelings, which are not everyday feelings. Just to say that something is true because it is everyday, and that therefore it is valid, seems to me a poor basis for an artist to work on. I have no desire to listen to the bathroom noises of the artist. And when I was talking to about art to me, one of the things she said, she had it particularly in, I'm not quite sure why, but for contemporary French art, she was saying they might as well put a camera in the toilet.
I think I remember that from one.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Evans goes on, yeah, I want to hear something better, something that the artist has dedicated his life to preserve and to present to me. So that's very true. So that's one aspect. And then, yeah, I go on about all these different qualities. I could read just one or two more. Short.
That's a lovely quote. That's a lovely quote there that you've used, because it really helps you understand the difference between the motivations of modern artists and yet there's somebody who's trying to be inspirational and sincere and
definitely. Actually, I can never find what I'm looking for.
Rather than being cathartic.
Yes, exactly. So there's different things. I mean, I talk about how I feel art shouldn't be mechanical. That's more on the superconscious side, where it's just as if it could be made by a machine. But it shouldn't be arbitrary. It shouldn't be just anything you want. On the other hand, so
there's a lovely quote you give also about I think it's Vilayat Khan, when he talks about, because Indian music traditionally, you think you're listening to a rag with a lot of improvisation, but in your quote you say how disciplined he was, how he learned and would practice the piece again and again and again before he actually came to perform.
It takes a lot of discipline.
And then from that basis of practice and learning, he would then be able to be improvisational and spontaneous and inspiring.
That's what I was going to read, actually. I'll just read a little bit of it.
Nice. Awesome.
So I argue that, true art, yes, it is spontaneous. It has this spontaneous quality about it, but that's different from the arbitrary. And I try to define the distinction between these two things. Again, I think you find in Shri Mataji's talks a disparagement for the arbitrary. It's not considered a good thing. So Arvind Parikh, the friend and pupil of Vilayat Khan, actually there's I saw very recently, it popped up on YouTube, a little message, a spoken message from Vilayat Khan, the master, to Arvind Parikh, where he's talking of the guru, the musical guru, his disciple and his friend. And it's very beautiful. It's a moving little message, well worth listening to. Anyway, Arvind Parikh, the friend and pupil of Vilayat Khan, recalls his teacher's admonition. He would stop you and say, "You haven't fixed the sa and you go to pa. Don't say, I felt like it. In music, everything must be reasoned out." Excuse me. That is to say that every note should have its logical place in the sequence of the artist's music. So that if he is asked afterwards why he played that particular note, the artist should be able to say, for such a reason, and not merely, I don't know. According to Parikh, Khan was a very meticulous and thorough man. I should say that Vilayat Khan is another hero in the book. And I find his music, the great sitarist, to be just beyond. I think he is a great artist of the 20th century. There's many great sitarists, many great Indian artists, but to me, there's something special about him. It's like other people play the sitar. He is the sitar, or the sitar is an extension of him in a way that's unusual. So he says, Parikh is going on. He never compromised and never did anything haphazardly. When preparing for a concert, Parikh tells us, Vilayat Khan tried out every phrase of a rag in a variety of ways until it delivered the desired melodic and acoustic result, and practiced it for as long as it took to perfect it before a performance. Only the flashes of spontaneous brilliance relied on chance. Someone else says, the hard core of every rag was subjected to serious exploration in isolation and ruthless preparation for punctilious execution. And this is Deepak Raj, a sort of musical critic. But it should be said, however, that this description makes it sound as though the final concert performance was mainly a matter of repeating something already perfected, with just a touch of spontaneous improvisation here and there. In fact, that's not the case at all, as you can see if you listen to any of his concerts. And the same, Bill Evans had exactly the same approach to his music, and he says it's better to practice. What does he say? Something like one piece of music for 24 hours than 24 pieces of music for one. Really go into it in depth, so that you then, in performance, you have the capacity. It's like your fingers know what they're doing, and you don't have to think, what am I going to do next? Where am I supposed to go? It just flows. And that's very much what I get from Evans's music, which also, like Vilayat Khan's, to me, has this quality of beauty. That it's so beautiful. And but that's a personal matter. I mean, I'm not insisting on this at all. And if people read the book and never listen to Bill Evans because it's not their kind of music, that's fine. I just use him because I know quite a lot about him, and I listen to his work a lot. And the same with Vilayat Khan. I've collected, in each case, all the music I can find, not just the stuff that was officially produced in album form, but also all the kind of bootleg sessions I can find. So
that's such a lovely way. You've put so much in there. Is there are there a few things that you would like to add before we move into the next section
I think
about?
I'll just read one little bit, which says a little more about the difference between subconscious and superconscious. And I say, this is a chapter, a very brief chapter called It is Inviting. So that a work of true art has a kind of courtesy towards the reader or viewer or listener and so on. There's almost a kind of protocol on both sides, the artist's side and the audience's side, in how to approach a true work of art. But then I say subconscious influenced art distorts or perverts this process. It's altogether more manipulative in its approach to us, rather than ushering us in through the front door of the aesthetic experience, so to speak. It would have us peer in through a window like a peeping Tom, or would pull us indoors half against our will. It would like us to get lost in its pornographic texts, its stories of despair, its crude, obliterating rhythms, its silly frivolity, whatever it happens to be that's coming from this far left side. It wants to lure our attention in or exert a hypnotic control over us or narcotize us or in some other way overpower us. True art leaves us free. In fact, it has a liberating effect, whereas subconscious influenced art would like to possess our attention. Superconscious influenced art, on the other hand, does not invite our attention in. Rather than distorting this aesthetic protocol, it merely ignores it. And I give a few examples that I've talked about in the book. And these works extend no invitation and offer no courtesy. Instead, they declare, in effect, if you're interested, which you should be, you have to make sense of us. They hail the ego within us, with which, if we respond, we must identify. So a lot of people, love modern art, modern architecture. They feel it gives them a sort of pumped up feeling. They love conceptual art because they can think about it, it makes them think. And they think that the purpose of art is to make us think, whereas we obviously would say it's to make us thoughtless, to go beyond thought. Although it should also be able to be articulated in thought. You can say why it is, like Khan saying why he played that particular note. It has a logical meaning, but the purpose is to take us beyond that rationalizing level up higher.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so that's one little way how I feel true art is different from very left-sided and very right-sided kinds of art.
So would you say, Chris, that it was, Shri Mataji talked to you for a long time. That was a very long time about all these things. So it seems it was very important to her that this message should come out into the society of today, that the traditional, inspirational, sublime aspects of pure art should not be discarded or pushed away, as there is that strong movement towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, she definitely wanted, this message about the compassionate power of art and how art should be, something sublime. She wanted this message to be put across and established, and a new, we need a new renaissance. And I feel, we're still kind of collectively, across the whole of society, we're still really beginning to recognize the depth of the problem, and the solutions are slowly, hardly beginning to emerge yet. But there are a lot of good visual artists out there. One sees them on Instagram being, popping up. People who are very technically accomplished, and on a small scale, there are some very, just talking about the visual arts, there are some very nice things out there. But I feel that what's missing mainly is the myth or mythos that, the great art of the Christian world coming up from before the Renaissance and through the Renaissance, after the Renaissance, and then fading away as sort of capitalism developed. It had that Christian myth meaning, a system of symbolism. I don't mean a myth as an illusion. And it had that underpinning myth, which gives its substance. It serves as a way of connecting our art making, sort of mark making and art and our writing and music making and so on, to something beyond. But we don't have that now. The Christian myth, in practical terms, as sort of in art and culture, it's just not there anymore. People do believe in Christ, but it's not being expressed in any real living sense in art and culture. It should always be renewing itself if it has living truth to it, and it's not doing that.
It's interesting what you were saying too, because that you're not just advocating to go back to traditional ways of art. What we're talking about is creating art that has sincerity, that has beauty, that has something in it. You talk about the Chaitanya, the living vibrations, the living energy that comes through it. And just today, I was looking at a friend's artwork in Seattle. She's an acrylic artist on canvas, but it amazes me how she can do these very abstract designs with color that touch. You look at them and you feel this is beautiful. I don't know how she does it, except that I know for her there's tremendous sincerity of heart and an attempt to create beauty within it. So you feel like it has this living energy in it. So it's so important, I think, your book that takes apart, and the first part is very much about the modern way of thinking about art, and that was hard to get through.
But it was necessary. There's no sugarcoating in this book. It's like it's all very set and clear, and it's expressing truth in such a confident way that it's really, really refreshing.
And I felt like, in the same way that as I was trying to understand how you're sharing what modern critics, thinkers of art, and my brain is just going, oh, this is so complex, this is so convoluted. But then somehow you get through that and you come out, and then the book then starts to go into, well, what is truth and beauty in art, and there's a lovely progression in it. And and because you filled it with so many references, I mean, maybe Rishi wants to speak to that, and so many stories that it's not, I thought, oh, it's going to be a bit of an intellectual treatise, but it's not like that. It's written from the heart, sharing so many lovely things. I know, Rishi, you had, and because Rishi is a musician, is quite an accomplished musician. So I think this book must have spoken to you on many levels. Could you share that, Rishi?
No, absolutely. I mean, in the last podcast, we were talking about, Chris, your kind of your interest into Sahaja Yoga and how it has kind of it's like clasped hands with your writing journey also. And I remember you saying that Shri Mataji wanted you to write for seekers, right? And then as I was reading these two books, actually, the Pearl of Wisdom and Art's Love and Truth, that same message actually kind of came across. But this time the audience was, not your everyday seeker. It was like the academics. And so you do have like this slight intellectual spin to everything. And it's just enough to get the academic it's just enough to get the academic reflecting upon himself.
Yes.
Yeah. I went to study for a PhD, and So I really kind of picked up the scholarly habits, but I was
Yeah.
never wholly comfortable because the whole academic world is sort of very, I mean, it's got its problems, deep problems. And,
Right. Yeah.
but it helped me to, I think, give it a kind of academic backbone or scholar, I
Hmm.
prefer the word scholarly
Hmm.
backbone to the book. And as for the
Yes.
point
Yes.
Felicity was making about what kind of art we should be producing, I mean, my answer is uh, that really the unconscious is the doer, and we are just the translators of the unconscious, of the divine. So I don't have to kind of sit here and think, we should be writing such and such kind of book, painting such and such kind of painting. It's for artists to be able to manifest the unconscious rather than the super or the subconscious, and that's how the new is going to be produced. But of course, traditional techniques and so on are very basic and very important. So I don't think I'm not saying we should go back. We can't
Hmm.
really go back. But how we go forward is this great freedom there. It's not for any one person.
Mm.
It has to be like this or it's not real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, it has to be creative. We have to find a creative way.
Yeah.
Can we just, Rohan, can we just take a pause? Can we just take a pause? Can you?
So about the timeline of this Art, Love and Truth book. So as I said, I was thinking about it when I was a student, which would have been in about 1973,
Wow.
4, 5. And then Shri Mataji talked to me and really gave me the encouragement to go ahead with it in 1984, in the summer of 84. And then I wrote 3 distinct books before it was the third one that is more or less the one that's published, and that was finished in 2011. So you can see how long.
Wow.
That's partly
Yeah.
because it's been very slow, but partly because also a lack of. It's quite difficult when you've got this academic world sort of sitting on the top of your head.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Forge a different way of writing about these things without seeming amateurish or
Hmm.
just, not um, profound in any way. So that was difficult. And then, but the main thing is I'm studying, I'm thinking about these things. Every
Hmm.
sort of idea, I always try and look at it in the round. So, it
Hmm.
sounds good, but does it really make sense if you look at it, sort of from
Right.
the side and so on? So,
Approaching it from all the different angles that you
yeah.
can.
So
Yeah.
really trying to get a kind of a deep understanding of it. So
Hmm.
it was 2011 I finished it, but then the possibility of publishing it with Richard's help, Richard Haynes,
Hmm.
which was been tremendous, um, came up, and then I revised it and added quite a few bits and pieces and so on. So it was for me a very long process. Never give up, kids. That's what I say.
and reworking and revising is the key to producing an accomplished, finished
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
You can. I mean, there are books in the history of the world that have been written amazingly quickly and are amazingly good. They're not. They don't tend to be this kind of book. They're more fiction.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But
And Ruth,
yeah.
would you like? It was so nice you joined us. I know you've been in the room listening all this time.
Enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, if I could write a book on art, it would be like Art, Love and Truth, because all the ideas in Art, Love and Truth I feel very strongly about, and I've always been very concerned about art and the state of art in the world, and very aware of the difficulties and how far from truth it has strayed, and that's been really close to my heart. So I suppose,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really. very important for me as well. And I've been in there on the whole process, and we always discuss all the ideas and what's going on in the world. And
because you yourself are also an artist, a very accomplished artist, and I know
Yeah.
your house is filled
I've
with
seen that.
Ruth's artwork, and
Wow.
she trained as well. You know, went to art school. So I'm sorry, I spoke over you. Repeat.
I don't do as much as I should, but I'm trying to get into a
Yeah.
place now where I start.
Yes.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, as always, I say, you know, we really appreciate your support, Ruth, for Chris to be able to produce a beautiful book like this. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us for Art, Love and Truth. And I think there'll be a link to purchasing the book, and people should not be put off by the length of it. It's you know, I love the way you made the short chapters. It's worth taking the time.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so we'll move on to Pearl of Wisdom, this other book. Okay, and so this book, I'm trying to do.
Just a minute. Pause. Just a minute.
Welcome back. So this is the third episode, and today we're going to talk about the third book by Uncle Chris. It's called The Pearl of Wisdom. Welcome, Uncle. Shri Mataji.
Hi. Right. So yes, Pearl of Wisdom. So this is a book, as it sounds, about wisdom, and I had it in mind for a long time to do something quite philosophical, and so this mainly came up when I was studying for a PhD on an unrelated, well, sort of related but a different subject, in the early 2000s. And, you know, again, I was trying to think, you know, there are problems, philosophical problems, the problems about philosophy itself and what it has come to, how it's been kind of contained and controlled by the academy, by universities. And philosophy has become academic rather than to do with the basic seeking questions of what is truth, how do we become true beings who mean something to ourselves and to the world, and so on. These deeper questions, the ancient and original questions of philosophy. And so I was thinking about this, and then gradually it kind of consented into the idea that what I should be doing is writing about wisdom and trying to establish the principles, to get to the principles of what is wisdom itself. So very much like in my book on art, Art, Love and Truth, where I'm trying to establish the principles of true art. I'm trying, as Shri Mataji has said we should do when we're thinking about intellectual matters, philosophical subjects, we should try to get to the principles of things. So that's what I'm trying to do with this book on wisdom. It's a work of discrimination, again, as with the art book, about what is wisdom and what isn't. Now, having said all that, one may say, well, what's the problem? You know, wisdom is wisdom. We all know if I say it's wise to do such and such, or wouldn't it be wise, etc. We know what I mean by the word wise. We know roughly, at least, what I mean. But when we look into it in more depth, it is very surprising how wisdom becomes quite elusive. What is it? There are things about it. For example, it's very unwise, I think we would all agree, to say, I'm wise, I'm a wise person. You know, you want wisdom? There it is. Yeah, but that's strange. Why is, you know, it's kind of seems like self-contradictory. How can you get at wisdom if you're not allowed to say you're wise or you have, you know? So, you know, it is an elusive thing, definitely. I think, I mean, partly this is because it's a living quality, and the living is always elusive when it comes to trying to pin it down, because ultimately it can't be pinned down. And the best one can do is try to approximate to a sort of process of pinning it down in words, of descriptions and so on. But it's living. So it's talking about wisdom, and one thing I should say, I feel wisdom is really important. It's one of the fundamental qualities, obviously, because it's a quality of, as we understand it, of the Muladhara chakra, at the whole base of this tree of life of spirituality within us, and it's the quality of Sri Ganesha. And Shri Mataji, talking about spirituality, has said, she can give self-realization. She can give all that. The divine can give all that. But the wisdom part of it has to be wrought by ourselves. God can't make us wise, not directly. And that's a tremendous idea. And, it gives us a lot to work on. Now, the sort of seed of wisdom is within us already, I would say. That it is within the Muladhara chakra, maybe the Argya chakra. But it has to be developed. And that's where our personal responsibility comes in. There's always this question of what is mine and what is thine? What do I have to do in seeking truth, and what is done actually by the unconscious or by the divine? And if I try to do it, then I'm actually overstepping the mark. I'm going off into the ego. It's a very big question, both philosophically and in everyday practice. But wisdom, I think, yes, is something we have to develop ourselves. And, again, the divine can create events for us to work out things, sometimes disasters, sometimes beautiful things. The divine can, or the unconscious can give us dreams. It can do things like that. But ultimately, it's up to us to develop this wisdom. So that's why I feel wisdom is a really important thing and a rather neglected quality. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is that I feel in contemporary life, wisdom is really undervalued. We don't talk about it. If sort of governments want to work out some new project or come up with some solution for something, they might kind of put it out to focus groups. They might get the experts in, the scientists and so on, the holy people of the modern age. They might turn to AI. I mean, probably increasingly they will. They'll use AI to sort of, they'll put in all the data and see what comes out of the machine at the other end. But wisdom isn't really spoken of very much. I give the example of how I believe the people who decide the interest rates at the Bank of England here in the UK are often called the wise men. But it's not clear whether that is a sort of because they're entrusted with this very big responsibility, and they are quite wise. They've practiced years of working these things out, or whether it's a sort of satirical, even a sort of sarcastic comment on their abilities or language. It's not clear. It could be either or both. Excuse me. So yeah, I feel there is this neglect of wisdom. It's not really discussed. There's a quote I use early on in the book, which is from J.D. Salinger, a writer I like a lot, The Catcher in the Rye author. And this is from another of his books, Franny and Zooey. And Zooey is Franny's brother, as far as I can recall. And Franny has been at college. And this is the little quote. Nervously and without any real need whatever, Franny pushed back her hair with one hand. I don't think it would have all got me quite so down if just once in a while, there was at least some polite little perfunctory implication that knowledge should lead to wisdom, and that if it doesn't, it's just a disgusting waste of time. But there never is. You never even hear any hints dropped on a campus that wisdom is supposed to be the goal of knowledge. You hardly ever even hear the word wisdom mentioned. And this was in 1962 when he was writing that, and it's even more true today, I think. So the book then is an investigation into the nature of wisdom and this question of why, as I'm suggesting and arguing, it's so neglected at the present time, and how can we recover an interest in wisdom? How can we maybe develop it within ourselves? And early on, I should say, I have a chapter called A Disclaimer, where I'm saying that this is very much a book that explores the subject. It is not a book of someone claiming to be an authority on wisdom. This is what it is, folks. I know. It's not that sort of book, and I wouldn't like to claim that at all. I'm just trying to explore it, and hopefully, obviously, I'm trying to come up with some answers, or there wouldn't be any point in answering the questions. So I'm trying to, when I was working on trying to develop within myself a deeper understanding of the nature of wisdom, and hopefully, therefore, becoming a little more wise myself. So now, what I want, it's a kind of long book. It's even longer than Art, Love, and Truth. And I was
but it's easier. It's easier to read, for me, because you interweave all these lovely references to folk stories. And as I was reading it today and thinking about it, and I realized, because I loved all these fairy tales, folk stories when I was a kid, and they were all moral stories, like Scheherazade, Arabian Nights, Grimm's fairy tale, Hans Christian Andersen. They all had a teaching. You learned something from them, and through reading them, and the characters in them become wiser through their experiences. And I thought that was a really interesting tool that you've used to help us, develop an understanding of wisdom. I mean, what do you say to
that? The book is it sort of works out an argument from beginning to end, but it to make it more concrete rather than just sort of ideas in the air. I'm using stories, a lot of stories I've collected over the years, thinking that would be a good anecdote to tell. Things that have happened to me myself, and as you say, fairy tales and folk tales. And the beauty of I'm fascinated by fairy tales. I have collected a lot, and I sort of read at least one every night before I go to bed.
Nice.
You'll have to give us recommendations.
Yeah.
I mean, I found, there are certain books, they're all tend to be quite old books, because when they were first recording folk stories in the 19th century and early 20th century, they have sort of more authenticity somehow, rather than when they've been worked over and worked over and worked over. But there's a couple of books of Greek fairy tales by a man called Dawkins, Richard McGillivray Dawkins, who was a scholar in the early 20th century. And those are books I really love. And there's a lot of Indian folk tales, which a lot of them I found in the Internet Archive, which is a brilliant resource, and I hope it continues and isn't closed down. But there are sort of old 19th century and early 20th century journals of Indian sort of cultural studies, you could say. It's one or two of them, which the British were, it's one of the, I think, a good thing they were doing when we were in India, the scholarship and recording these folk tales, otherwise they would have been lost. And they're very good too. Some good Jewish ones, Irish ones too. So yeah, anyway, I use a few of these, and in order to give the book a kind of, again, a spine to it, because it otherwise might seem to ramble around it. I construct this fairy tale, which is called The Pearl of Wisdom. But actually, as I admit at the end, I've made it up. It's not a sort of authentic fairy tale, and I'm telling you that now. It's a bit of a spoiler.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
But I'm taking elements of traditional fairy tales and using them.
Mhm.
So it has a sort of reality to it. And I mean, I spent a great deal of time trying to work out this fairy tale, which is actually very simple. I mean, it doesn't take up much of the book to tell it, it's just a few pages, although I kind of spread it out in episodes throughout the book. But I took, a great deal of time and effort over trying to make it feel right, that it was sort of, even though I'm writing it in the modern day deliberately, it's kind of coming from the unconscious. Yeah, it is coming from the unconscious. So that's what I was trying to do with that tale, to give the book a cohesion through it. So again, rather as with the art book, I'm talking about the problems being on the left side and the right side, and that there are two kind of projects working out in the world. One is, I mean, philosophical and practical problems, projects working out in everyday life. One is can be called the subconscious project, and this is where we get into conditioning. So, excuse me. This leads us to a very conditioned kind of thinking, especially that which is found in religions, also maybe politics, if it's very much on the right or the left, political sides, I mean, rather than the right and the left side being. And identity politics, Hamas, ISIS, BLM, I would say, these things all have this very conditioned element to them. They're sort of taking us into a kind of fixed way of looking at the world. And then there's the superconscious side of it, which again I feel is more dominant these days. I mean, the religions apart from Islam, I mean, Christianity has sort of really lost its grip on the modern way of thinking, modern imagination, although it's still there in the background. Islam is or at least, you know, sort of radical wing of Islam is a problem, a big problem, very conditioned, fanatical way of thinking. But the superconscious is this very rational, there's no God, there's no such thing as truth. This kind of project is really working out in the world. So, and it's the way that ego expresses itself. So a lot of the book is to do with this, what I call the superconscious project, trying to explain and explore for myself what it is, how it works out. And I look back through history at, I go back a lot to the French Revolution, because this is when the cult of reason, as it was described at the time, was initiated. I mean, it's a major event in history, I think, the French Revolution, where these issues really came to the fore. I mean, they were extremely radical. They wanted to abolish Christianity. When you think what a grip Christianity did have on Western culture back in the 18th century, it's surprising the lengths they went to try and rub it out in a few years. And they failed, but they did a lot of harm. I mean, one may say, well, it wasn't true Christianity, it was Catholicism, there was a great deal of falsehood in it, all true. But they were trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as so often happens. So I look a lot at the French Revolution, and particularly Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a little before the revolution, but was this philosopher, writer, who is still a figure who's very divisive. A lot of people are supporters of Rousseau. They feel that he's a sort of Sahaja Yogi in the making, because he talks about the importance of the child and of sort of native, how this has a kind of truth there's a truth in the child, and through our education and culture, we're sort of, distorting and blotting out that truth and so on. So he sounds like he's one of us, he's a good guy. But actually, I feel that he's one of the great negative forces in Western culture, and that it is confusing. And I explain why I feel this is, and I'm not the only one who feels that. I mean, Blake was very critical of Rousseau, and others, Isaiah Berlin and others have been also. The sort of acid test is what Rousseau did with his own children. He had 5 of them, and as soon as they were born, he put them all into sort of public care. Orphanage, yeah, and a state orphanage. He didn't even bother to name the last 4. And at the same time, he was incredibly brazen about this. He wrote a book saying, this was a wonderful thing that I did. And
would his children agree?
yeah, I mean, it was a death sentence, basically. Most of them died very young, the children who were left to these orphanages, which, as you can imagine, were pretty awful places in those days.
Yeah.
Or they were a kind of, it was giving them over to a life of poverty or beggary or prostitution. So, and this is what he did to his own children. He was a devil, I think, definitely.
So he had highfalutin ideals, but not.
Yeah, he had all the ideals, and we see the whole process working out today. Again and again.
It's so interesting what you're saying, because the difference of wisdom, what is wisdom, and that's what I took from that point of the book is, that we've lost this sense of understanding that wisdom is important in cultures, and we can see that in modern times, elders, in traditional countries and cultures, the elders were really respected because of their years of experience, and wisdom. This is my thoughts that came out of reading the book, was that wisdom is not something you can go and study in a university and learn how to be a wise person. It's something that comes to you through experience. And it reminded me of that lovely story Shri Mataji tells, where there's the 2 men going up and down the staircase.
Oh, yeah.
And one at the top is meeting the one coming up, and the one at the top says, stand aside, I don't make way for fools. And the one below says, luckily I do, and moves to the side, and that's the wise response. And that's the thing about wisdom. It reminded me also of the Zen stories, and Jesus's parables, that you gain wisdom through, it's a deeper level of understanding through experience, which I think you really demonstrated very well in the book, and brought into a conscious level, why wisdom is important. And at the end of the book, you've got this lovely chapter about what wisdom is, so many different things.
Yeah, so those are things that I've sort of kind of tried to establish throughout the book. I talk about, there's a Romanian fairy tale. I came across another one, actually. I can't remember where it was from, a different country, but a very similar idea about how they decided one day to kill off all the old people, all the old men. The women aren't mentioned, but presumably they were killed off too. And how this would be a sort of radical step, be good, the old men were useless, and so on. And
create a new society.
It's sort of the way since the Second World War and the rise of youth culture. This is something really new in the world, this youth culture, because youth are sort of big consumers now. They weren't in the past. And the sort of youth are deferred to. One sees this everywhere, in ads, advertisements and so on. Youth are the kind of people that middle-aged and old people want to be like. If old people ever feature in ads, it's when I saw one last night, actually. They were sort of, these old people were shown tobogganing down the snowy slopes. And it was like, they'd kind
lost their marbles.
Well, it was weird, tragic, but to them,
lost their marbles.
it's like the only thing they're sort of good for is to imitate young people. And there's been this reversal, whereas age, the sort of wisdom of age is just not thought
Yeah.
about at all.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Can I ask you, in the book you talk about, before we've got about you know, short time, could you talk a little bit about the cover, why you chose that cover, and also Sophia? What do you mean by you use the term Sophia-topia in the book quite a lot?
Okay, so Sophia, I mean, the book is a philosophical book. It's not in a sort of academic way, but philosophy, I mean, comes from this word philosophia, which is the love of wisdom.
Philosophia. There's Sophia in the word. Yeah, Sophia is in the word of philosophy. I never realized that.
So one of the themes of the book is to try to establish what philosophy should really be doing. I mean, there's a famous 20th century philosopher, Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, who was a horrible, a Nazi, and he's considered very important, and he was trying to say philosophy has to go back from thinking to being. It sounds good, but what it led him to not being a Nazi. But I'm trying to say, no, we have to go back to the love of wisdom, which is what philosophy really is. It should be. And the cover is, it's not very clear there, but there it is.
Oh, yes.
But this is from a work of an alchemical text from the 16th century, I think. And my son George coloured it nicely with his techniques that he has, his clever modern techniques.
Because he's a printer, because he makes prints and art.
Oh, okay. Wow. Nice.
In this is, I think, well, it's been described in various different ways, this picture, but this is Sophia here, the goddess, scattered flowers of inspiration. And he's the sort of alchemist, or we can say the philosopher, following her footsteps, as you can see, with the lamp of understanding.
Beautiful.
That is beautiful.
He's trying to sort of pick up the hints of the unconscious of Sophia. So I talk a lot about Sophia as a sort of way of just talking about God and the unconscious rolled into one, really, and the goddess, the mother, but always trying to make it a little bit different, or not different actually, but new, so this idea that we always have to renew the truth, how we express the truth. It has to be a continual kind of renaissance, otherwise it can stagnate and fixed. So I use the word Sophia, I like it. And I have a daughter called Sophia. So that's the cover. I thought it's a beautiful image. Book of Michael Meyer, his work on alchemy. And so just to go on a little bit more, a lot of the book is about this cult of reason, and how it was expressed very much in the French Revolution and then again in the Russian Revolution. And the same ideas, many of them come up again, the destruction of Christian religion, and this reliance on the great God rationality, as we don't need God, everything is rational. And Lenin, I talk a lot about him because we know he was a realized soul, but he also, unfortunately, is the author of all the disastrous things that happened, really, and they are terrible, the things that happened in and after the immediate Russian Revolution with Stalin. But it all begins with Lenin and his ideas. So there's a lot about that. There's a lot about how I feel this superconscious ego rationalizing project that's working out in the world creates sort of four, I talk about four main roles and four main moods. They're not sort of absolute concrete things that you can go up and say that's the mood of this and that's the role of that. but they're just a way of trying to talk about modern existence in a coherent way. So they're a bit simplistic, but not totally. And these moods, I won't go into them in any depth because we don't have the time, and I want you to read the book. But
Yeah.
the moods are culture. I say the number one mood is the problematical. Everything we talk about seriously is a problem. And this is something new. Again, Shri Mataji talked about this, how the word problem used to just refer to mathematics. It's become a sort of everyday problem. And we sort of assume that everyone's got a problem. And if you go into a shop and you buy something, they say, not a problem. It's like that's
Right.
one exception, that proves the rule that everything is a problem. And so I talk about problems a lot. And the other moods are the transgressive mood. Everything, there's this sort of rebellious mood that runs through society. Everybody tries to be a rebel. Even the people who are completely in power are kind of saying, yes, but there's something bad out there that I'm having to defend you from. And then
we just so many beautiful things in this book that we're going to have to read for ourselves, aren't we?
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
really want to thank you so much for joining us. I can hear there's so much more to share and talk about. And
we'll be posting a link on the description for the Amazon link. Yeah. Sorry, Auntie, to interrupt. Yeah.
And so thank you for writing such a book to bring this idea and understanding of wisdom back into our collective attention and for us to absorb it into our lives, a sense of our lives. We have kind of 2 minutes. I did want to just share that you also are an author of 3 detective books. Set in Bristol, and a children's book called The Chalk Giant, which we will also leave links to because which I really enjoy, the detective books. They're just nice and
2 of them have yet to be published, but we're working on them. They should be out hopefully before Christmas.
Okay, so we have that to look forward to.
And also just to briefly mention, you are working currently on another book, a big book, a life book.
A story. And I have lots of projects I want to write about, but whether I'll have time, I don't know. But
well, I think even with this, what a legacy.
Auntie and I were just talking, and it's just like, what legacy
you both, because it takes you need the support around you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for listening and for asking these questions. And yes, I do hope you enjoy these books. I do feel they have something to offer, and hopefully there will be many more.
Yes.
Looking forward to that. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.